Mark Leibovich is a national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine and a CBS News political contributor. Mark, I want to get your take on this immunity deal. What's your take? Why do you think the Intel Committee is not taking him up on his offer to testify?
Well, I mean, I think I would take them at their word, which is that it is premature. I mean, I think what was unusual is that Mr. Flynn and his attorney would go so public at a relatively early time on this because, certainly it raises questions about how culpable they might be, how nervous they are. And I think it's probably not that surprising that members of the Senate and certainly Congressman Schiff here would be a little bit arm's length in whether to take this at this early stage. I mean, I think they've been very non-committal. I think that's probably appropriate from both parties.
Earlier today, President Trump tweeted out, "The real story turns out to be surveillance and leaking. Find the leakers." Surveillance and leaking, you see there all in caps. Do you think the president's completely lost credibility with his tweets? How do you think people are reading this in Washington?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I do think that, tweeting and Twitter has been an incredibly valuable tool for him, certainly through the campaign and potentially, through the transition and in the early days of his presidency. The problem is you do only have so much you only have so much, credibility with a few of these. I think if you're a little bit unjudicious in throwing these things out, especially on the wiretapping accusations towards President Obama 3 weeks ago, which dominated 3 weeks, and there's been really no backup at all from any Republicans. I mean, you could argue that Devin Nunes's conduct 2 weeks ago going to the White House only made this thing more worse and just muddled. So I do think that, I guess sort of the layman's way of looking at this is maybe he needs some new material. I mean, I think, some would say that it could be a divergence from what they're really worried about, which is Russia. But it is a curious strategy. But again, I mean, Donald Trump has proven again and again, certainly during the campaign, that he answers to a very, very different sets of conventional wisdom or his own wisdom, and it proved to be effective then. I think he still thinks that it can work.
And at the top, Mark, we talked about the financial disclosure forms, which were released by the White House this weekend. It obviously shows Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. There could be some conflict of interest and issues there. Do you think it's going to be a problem for them?
Well, I mean, it's a problem in that there's a bit of a drumbeat of these stories at the White House. I mean, there are a lot of things that are kind of in this murky area between ethics and legalities. And it does seem that in so much as there's been a coherent determination by the Trump administration that they think that this is probably on the right side of the law, even if it's unusual, even if it might not be seen as ethical by the various watchdogs in the government and certainly in the public eye. It's something they feel comfortable going ahead and doing. I mean, I think certainly it's a distraction at the very least. We'll see if there's actually some legal exposure.
You were mentioning Russia earlier, and we heard from UN Ambassador Nikki Haley on Russia. I want to play some sound for you on that.
This administration agrees that Russia's involvement in Ukraine is wrong. And I think that if you listen to what he said about the elections, of course we don't want any country involved in our elections. And so that's going to happen. I think that Russia is very aware that they're on notice when it comes to certain issues.
She obviously has a different tone than the president. Is there any way to read the tea leaves here on where they're going with Russia?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think in some ways, obviously, that's a pretty strong statement, especially compared to what the president's been saying about Russia. On the other hand, I mean, I think the big question here is in fact there any coordination? Does Nikki Haley talk to President Trump about what she's going to say, about the seeming divergence between these two points of view? And if so, does President Trump care? Or is he just happy to sort of let his cabinet members go out and kind of freelance and set their own policy? If so, it certainly sends a missed message to Europe and even to Russia. So I think, it's curious, but I don't sense from President Trump or any of his public statements or any of Sean Spicer's public statements that this is something that they need to push back on or even muddle the waters on.
Mark Leibovich in Washington. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks, Rena.